Oh, fantastic. We have some of our audiences are here today already. Om Swastiastu, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody, our audiences who are tuning in with us today. And first and foremost, Happy New Year to all of us. I wish all of you a very good start of 2021 and wishing everyone a very good health and happiness. And I would like to welcome to the first online intercultural dialogue series of Sacred Rhythm, Reborn, Unison, Homecoming. For the participants, which includes the musicians, also the panelists, contributors, our partners, and the volunteers who have worked so hard since the very first day that we decided to initiate this festival. And of course, this event would not be possible without the enthusiasm and the spirits of our volunteers. So thank you all. And also, I would like to also welcome everybody who have only joined us today at the Dialog. I would like to inform you that the festival had already also began at the end of last year, 2020, and the first event took place on the 30th of December with the opening commencement speech by the founder of Sacred Bridge and Sacred Rhythm, Mr. Stephen Hill, who is with us today, and followed by a presentation, an audio-visual alchemy by Gado Gado Ensemble, and also following on the 31st of December, also the opening gong. And you can watch the presentations on YouTube, which we will give you the link also on the chat box later today. So welcome back to our audience who have already tuned with us since the opening day to the first webinar. And also welcome to others who've only joined us today. And very fortunately, we had the opportunity to organize a live dialogue and discussion in Bali as part of the opening gong event with the theme of Kembali, meaning to return home to the regional birthplace of Sacred Rhythm. Following the local social distancing rule, we managed to organize a small size audience discussion, but a very intimate and very engaging dialogue with Professor Ima De Bandem, Balinese artist and a scholar. Also joined our artistic director, Bapak Inyoman Astita, and also Marlo Bandem, who joined us on the very last minute in Bali with his very important project at the time. As for today's dialogue, it was the first chosen one in the program because it addresses the very important issue that the world is facing today, the COVID-19 pandemic. And on behalf of the Sacred Rhythm Reborn Unison team, it is an honor for us today to have Mr. Stephen Hill and Venerable Juewei to be with us today to address these very pressing concerns. So welcome, Stephen.
Thank you, Boo. Lovely to be here. Lovely to meet everybody else as well.
For most of us here who have heard Stephen, Stephen is the founder of Sacred Bridge and also the founder of Sacred Rhythm, the original festival that happened in the millennium. Stephen was an established international scholar before joining UNESCO. At the age of 30, he already founded the School of Sociology at the Wollongong University in Australia. He was a member of teaching faculty of many prestigious universities in Europe and United States. And one of them was the University of Chicago, where he taught in the late 60s. And Stephen studied 3 different fields in chemistry, business administration, and sociology, who made Stephen Hill a well-rounded scholar.
Well-rounded.
So we are very happy to have Stephen Hill today, because since the very first Reborn of Sacred Bridge, when our chairman, the late Serrano Sianturi, passed away, Stephen has endlessly have supported us and guided us in leading the new Reborn generation of Sacred Bridge to move forward in the future. And through our exchanges of emails and phone calls, Stephen has introduced me with a dear colleague of Stephen, who he has also worked for a long time and produced very many important topics and issues through the Kyoto Manifesto for Global Economics, a dear friend of Stephen, and also a friend of mine and the Sacred Bridge, Venerable Juewei. Welcome.
Thank you so much for the invitation. My privilege and my pleasure.
About a year ago, Juewei and I exchanged email, and she informed me that she will be coming to Indonesia to visit the Borobudur, which is the largest, the oldest temple, Buddhist temple in Indonesia. And through that period, we shared so many things. And Juewei had sent me a very insightful book, which is called Foundational Thoughts, Studies on Humanitic Buddhism, which I have the book here. And that has been quite an enriching year for me, 2020, to learn more about the foundational thoughts on humanistic Buddhism. So we're very lucky to have Juewei here today to address these very concerning issues from the perspective of humanistic Buddhism. And also she is a Buddhist economist that also will counter Stephen's perspective on the economic side, the economic impacts of this COVID-19 pandemic. So now I think we shouldn't wait anymore. Just a very brief background. This Immunity and Community webinar confronts the current global COVID-19 pandemic head on and asks how can our humanity come out of it stronger and more compassionate than we were before. COVID-19 virus crossed the species barrier from animals to humans late in 2019 and sending the whole world into chaos. So before I pass the floor on to Venerable Juewei, I would like to inform everybody that there will be a Q&A session at the end of the dialogue. So as the dialogue begins, you can type in your questions in the chat box, and the coordinator, Mr. Tias, and myself will take some notes, and we'll choose some questions that I will be asking to Stephen and Juewei later. So, and let's begin. And please, Juewei, you can carry on. Give us a more in-depth context about the dialogue today.
Sure. Thank you so much, Boo, for this lovely introduction and reminder of how we first met. Before I begin the dialogue, may I please extend my gratitude to Sacred Bridge Foundation for organizing this intercultural dialogue, and of course to Bubu and your team for this fabulous work that you do to put together a month-long festival. We know how difficult that is. You must have lost a lot of sleep in the process. So I've put together a PowerPoint to facilitate the sharing of some ideas and images. So may I trouble Tias to give me the opportunity to share screen with you, please? Okay, thank you so much, Tias. So let me now share the screen with you. I hope you can see it. Is it good? Yeah. So move on to. So about a year ago, as Bubu has said, I was in Borobudur to experience the last sunrise of 2019. It was fabulous. This year, I experienced the last sunrise of 2020 here in Nan Tien and realized a very deep sense of connection in both sacred time and sacred space. In the year between these two spectacular sunrises, COVID made the world a much smaller place and helped us to reinvent ourselves. So now, as Bubu has said, as we begin the new year, it's a good time to reflect on what happened in 2020 and what the new world would be that we can look forward to in 2021. So Stephen and I decided to title our dialogue Immunity in Community during this COVID-19 crisis because we both are strong believers in the power of community. While we look forward very much to the awaited COVID-19 vaccine, I'm afraid that, like the flu vaccine, we really are not sure that if one vaccine will solve the problem. This is because COVID-19 is revealing a much deeper underlying problem, sort of like the tip of the iceberg. The COVID crisis is not only a health crisis. We believe that the coronavirus helped to uncover the economic, health, and moral crises that are below the waterline. Community offers the social context for care to take place. Caring and sharing develops trust instead of self-interest and alienation. And to develop real immunity, we proposed the 3 C's of human creativity, compassion, and capacity. 1, so that we can build an altruistic culture of care. The background to COVID-19 and its impact is set within an increasingly self-centered economic world that Stephen will talk to us about. So we must recognize and move beyond this. So now I'd like to welcome Stephen to help us better understand the economic crisis that's before us. Stephen, please.
Thank you, Juewei, and thank you very much all for attending and coming along and hearing this. Juewei's image of the iceberg with so much underwater, I should say, behind it is very important. We can see the impact at the moment, for example, of unemployment and other things on the economy as it is, but there's a whole underworld impact, both now and in the past, which matters a great deal and matters particularly if we're thinking about moving forward in the future. Now, I'll take you through a little bit of information about this. Maybe you're familiar with some of this, but probably not all. Firstly, about the virus, and I know that you know the basic ideas about this. Globally, by now, 85 million people have caught the coronavirus within the last year, 85 million. And 2 million of these people have died. That's by WHO. In the United States alone, there's been 20.7 million people who've caught the virus, which is 6% of the population. Incredible number. And in the last day, since yesterday, 1,800 people in America died from COVID. Indonesia, I believe the cases are somewhere like about 800,000 and the deaths just over 20,000. Now, the impact is on unemployment, obviously. For a start, it made the actual process of trying to avoid being caught in the COVID crisis means there's been a series of shutdowns and social distancing and so on, which have actually destroyed the possibility in many cases of people to work, particularly in developing countries in the informal sector. In the case of Indonesia, this is about 61 to 70% of the entire workforce of Indonesia. So the impact is enormous. Oxfam points out that globally, 400 million jobs have been lost as a result of this, and 500 million people will be pushed newly into poverty by the time this pandemic is over. I mean, that's an enormous, enormous impact on our world compared to what we would potentially have even thought of a year and a half ago. So if we're looking at the future, we've got to look very carefully at what we really want to produce. Apart from anything else, we've also had severe social suffering as well, and trauma. So people are not always that prepared to look into the future. A lot of people, for example, just because of the shutdowns and the lack of social contact, are suffering mental problems right now. What we then find is that countries which put the economy first, instead of COVID first, failed. Sweden was a classic case. They decided to actually leave COVID to look after itself and allow people to voluntarily take action to avoid being infected. They now account for 2/3 of all the deaths in the Nordic region. Presidentially led chaos in the United States, which has 25% of the overall death rate of the entire world. But what then matters is that under the crisis, the rich benefited more than the poor, even from the financial relief support. One very particular example is the United States. President Trump signed into action the CARE Act on the 27th of March last year, and 82% of the money, 82%, went to people who earned over $1 million per annum, and 5% to those paid less than $200,000, let alone those much further down. Of the money spent on COVID, that's about $10 billion by OECD. Supporting COVID worldwide, 88%, as you'd expect, has been spent in the advanced countries, 2% on the vast regions of developing countries. So even with COVID, there's massive inequality on the impact of what it did. So immunity must come before economy. It didn't work when they tried to maintain the economy and somehow maintain the immunity. Plus, we can see the background economics just starting to emerge of self-interest and inequality. And they're being played out in the very heart of the response to the COVID crisis. They're more important now because we're thinking about the future. And some leaders, including the Prime Minister of Australia, Prime Minister Morrison, want us to snap back to the world of self-interest-based economics we had before COVID came along, and which was played out all the way through the COVID epidemic. So look at what this world looked like. Look underneath the water of that image that we looked at before. Firstly, on global inequality, 8 men control as much wealth as half the rest of the world, and it's getting worse. This is where the free market has been heading for decades. In other words, advantage for a very, very small number of people. We then look at lack of care about the environment, and we look at what the United Nations itself is telling all the countries, and the countries are saying to them, global warming is real, and what's happening to the animal world is real. 1 billion animal species are currently threatened with extinction. More importantly for us, 75% of global food crops, 75% of what we eat, which depend on animal pollination, are also threatened. And indeed, in the last 20 years, there's been a 75% increase in climate disasters compared to the period before. So most self-interested of all, we then find in the middle of the COVID crisis, people making a fortune out of the crisis itself. Enormous profits. A very particular case is the case of a man called Bill Ackman. He's what they call a hedge fund billionaire. In March 2020, he came on board television's CNBC, and he said, hell is coming. There's depression, predicted shutdown of the United States economy. Meanwhile, his company, Pershing Squire Capital Management, invested $2.26 million on what are called credit bets. In other words, they pay off if the loan bundles that are there drop in value. If the economy goes down, he makes money. Guess what? 1 week later, he had made, wait for it, $2.6 billion, whilst other people lost their houses, lost their jobs, and died. On top of that, there are many cases which you can find of people who bought up stocks of things early and made them very expensive for everybody else. We don't want to go back to that. Instead, we want to leap forward. And Juewei and I in particular have been talking for a long time now about moving forward and the possibility of doing this according to the values of our humanity, of caring and sharing and trust. Now, there's a very useful word in Chinese about crisis. It's the word weiji. Doesn't quite mean this in Chinese, but it does, by the way. It's been used in the West. There are two sides of crisis. One side is danger, but the other side is opportunity, because everything is thrown in the air, and while it is, you can make change happen. I've done this myself in my United Nations job years ago. So you're finding quite important world leaders, including, for example, the recent retired governor of the Bank of England. These are economists at the top of the heap, and they are calling for a future economy which is based on humanitarian values rather than just finance, because they can see what's been happening, and it's increasingly becoming unequal, increasingly becoming inhuman. And that's what we're talking about. So what we are now saying then is that it's important to look underneath that water. It's important to see what was there before the COVID crisis came along, and how much self-interest has guided a lot of the actions that have been happening during that crisis. It also matters that we look at the future in terms of culture, our own cultures, but particularly creativity. It's at the core, because we have to be able to look at new solutions for what's going on. With this, I'll turn back to Juewei.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This whole thing about the inequalities that were already inherent is troubling, isn't it? I think we have to look at ways to rise above this economic crisis and the increasing inequalities. That gap, the poverty gap, is scary. So as you have said, we have to look at new ways of doing things and to overcome our inherent weaknesses. So for that, I want to share a personal example of me and art. Now, I've never done well in art since primary school. However, I strongly believe that art has a lot to teach us. So I'm going to ask again for permission to share screen, if I may, so that I can show you an art piece that I have recently, very recently, as in last month, that I've created, and the message behind it. So recently, I created a 3D art piece entitled The Tree of Harmony. The trunk, the black trunk that you see, is created from a 3D pen. And the leaves and the bird's nest, it's actually a little bird's nest at the side. That is all pieces of nature that we've picked up around the Nan Tien grounds. I use this tree to teach harmonious coexistence. Harmonious coexistence is a term that my teacher, Venerable Master Xing Yuan, keeps highlighting to us. We are now moving into an increasingly technological world. There's no turning back. But we should not abandon nature either, because we are already heading towards environmental disasters. So we need to look for ways of harmoniously coexisting with all the elements that are around us, but yet at the same time avoid hitting that iceberg, avoid the ship sinking like Titanic. So COVID has forced us to think creatively out of the box. It helps us to overcome our limitations. On that poster, my name is there as an artist. I wouldn't have imagined that since I failed art since primary school. But now is an opportunity for us to think win-win and not win-lose. How do we do that, Stephen?
Okay, I will give you two examples. One is, they're both related to, well, the first one is particularly related to community and creativity and what can happen. And you can look at this yourself. In Jakarta, there's a village, an urban village called Bantarsari. Now, I haven't been there since about 2006, so things may be a little different now. But in the course of what we did before, working in Indonesia, we realized that the pollution of Jakarta Bay was unbelievable. And we started working firstly with the people in the islands, and then secondly with the markets. And finally, we started to work with 3 villages, one of which was Banjarsari, where the people became directly involved themselves in creating a totally green town. If you go there, you will see it. It's all trees, it's all involved in recycling, and they developed enormous creativity. Just to give you one very specific example. At one stage, the young people were doing 2 things. One was to use recycled paper for origami, and we were able to organize by bringing someone out to show them exactly what worked, for them to sell this in Tokyo to department stores. Secondly, they decided that they would use kerosene tins at this size as waste bins in offices, and they painted them with really bright colors, but specifically with environmental messages on them in those images, and put them on the street they cost 50 cents. They came on the streets for $5, and within an hour, a French guy came past and bought 150. And this was the kind of thing which happened. The community created this themselves, and they created it just with a bit of help to sort of guide on the way in the start. It became and they did become Jakarta's official urban ecology village. The second example is Sacred Bridge. And this relates to work which Sacred Bridge did, or we did together, in 2005 after the tsunami in Aceh, which was horrific. I don't know if any of you had any contact with it at all, but a wave coming into your town going 8 kilometers inland at 20 meters high or bigger had enormous impact. There was a tree, for example, close to the front of Aceh, I should say, Banda Aceh, where in the branches above the wave, 21 people had rescued themselves by hanging onto the branch. It was just unbelievable. But the children, the orphan children, were terribly, terribly traumatized. 38,000 of them had died. And all of these children, as a matter of fact, were desperately traumatized. They were just frozen. Their minds were frozen. Some had lost maybe 40 relatives. Some of the children had been swept maybe 2 kilometers by the wave before they were able to hang on to something and survive. It was silent. Sacred Bridge, with a bit of help from myself and my own people, but particularly Sacred Bridge, came with music, volunteers, people who knew what they were doing, and worked with the children in an atmosphere of care, using music and culture and creativity and performance with the children to take them home back into their culture. And the result is they were healed. There's a film on YouTube, which you can see, called Rising Above the Tsunami, Sacred Bridge. It's worth looking at. I actually showed this film to the United Nations ambassadors in Paris, and believe it or not, some of the people actually cried. It was the power of creativity to heal. Juewei, back to you.
Right, that power to heal. It's so important to look at alternatives. So let's look at the economic crisis as really an opportunity to save humanity on this path of self-destruction. Let's look for creative alternatives to allow for harmonious coexistence. Let's move on now, Stephen, to the health crisis, one that many may be quite familiar with. Besides the growing numbers who are now being declared COVID positive worldwide, we must not also ignore the many who are affected by social isolation. Mental health issues are also mounting. Stephen, can you tell us in a few words about the extent of the health crisis we are facing?
I can a little. There's two or three things to think about on this. I mean, the first is the massive, as I told you before, the massive number of people affected, the depth of which it penetrated so many societies, particularly, surprisingly enough, in the developed countries. Penetrated extremely deeply, right through the whole of the society. And so it caused enormous trauma and problems such as mental illness, as people were not able to connect into their social world anymore. It also had another side, which in fact was that people started, in a lot of case situations, to actually look after each other, to care. This certainly happened around where I lived. People would go and check on their neighbors and actually see if people were okay. Now, these are the two sides of what happened in the COVID crisis, which I think was important for the health, because ultimately real health is about balance of yourself and within yourself. But what we should also realize is that this is a very unequal impact in the world. And again, I come back to inequality, and therefore what was under the water in the image that Juewei presented at the start. Let's take Africa for a minute. In Africa, the support that's available for people who get sick is hardly even there. The whole of Africa has only 20,000 critical care beds. That is 1.7 bed for each 100,000 people. The African health budget for citizens is probably about $12 a year. In the UK, it's 4,000. And in 10 African countries, they'd have absolutely no ventilators at all. They cannot look after the people. And many of the people, and also this would be the case in parts of Indonesia, must live in a single room, must go out to work, and not so that they can eat. So they're much more susceptible to infection. Again, the same system of inequality, and behind it, the economic of inequality. So the health response, in a sense, is a paradox. To limit the pandemic is to care, and this is shown very clearly in the case of New Zealand, that immediately stopped the borders and immediately stopped people going out and developed mechanisms, for example, of social distancing, wearing masks, and so on. And they basically got rid of the virus. It's come back in bits and pieces, but not seriously. And then the reverse side, of course, is the mental illness of people cooped up, which we talked about before. As I said before, we must be reminded still that there is danger, and the other side of danger in crisis is opportunity of sharing, caring, and trust. So what we're really doing in the treatment of people, both in COVID, but also in general about health, is to bring harmony back to their body. And this is important in terms of just, I mean, yes, it is done through medicine, but medicine is basically boosting the body's own self-healing power. It's very much to do with looking after yourself and finding balance within yourself to restore the balance in a way that will then help you heal and people around you as well. Juewei, perhaps you might like to talk a little more about this.
Yes. That's right. Thank you, Stephen. Indeed, you're right. Harmony is a key to humanistic Buddhism. And our goal is to bring harmony to both body and mind. But recently, let me share something quite funny. I had to install a computer firmware upgrade, and my eyes were immediately drawn to a particular message. As part of the upgrade, the computer says, and I quote, "Self-healing BIOS backup progressing." I cannot believe it. Even my laptop knows how to perform its own self-healing backup.
Let's learn from my computer.
I immediately had to write this down for today. So before we build the various communities of care, I think we also need self-healing. We need to restore that inner balance. So may I invite everyone here to just join us and pamper ourselves with a 1-minute meditation. So wherever you are, let's sit up. Sit up straight and comfortably. Gently close your eyes. Bring your attention to your forehead. Relax your forehead, eyes, facial muscles. Relax your neck muscles, shoulders, upper arms, lower arms, hands and fingers. Relax. Relax your back. Relax your your thigh muscles, calf muscles, feet and toes. Allow your body to relax. Now bring your mind to the tip of your nose and just watch your breath without control and without judgment, but just watching it for the next minute. There may be a lot of turbulence in the world out there. There may be a lot of noise in my neighborhood. But we shouldn't let our mind be disturbed. It is important for us to initiate a practice of self-compassion, to give ourselves the time to heal, the time to restore harmony between body and mind. And it could be as little as 1 minute every day. And when you're ready, gently return to the moment and open your eyes. I hope that the Zoom session ahead of you, in front of you, the screen, is now shining with lots of love and care. Stephen, how do you feel?
As always, Ven Dr Juewei, I feel more relaxed, and I most certainly feel more like I'm connected than I was before when I was thinking about what I'll say next. Now I've got to think about what I say next. But that was lovely. Thank you. Perhaps I also might just add a little. What we've been talking about, I think very clearly, has been about two basic kind of things. Number one, that in the background or under the water behind us or below us, what we're dealing with in our real world, we have a whole pattern or waves of self-interest that are basically destroying the equity and the humanity of the world in which we live. We need to change that, and we have an opportunity to leap forward and actually do that, even with support right now. I think we have a serious possibility to be able to care, but particularly the other side of this connection between oneself and others, which is fundamental. It's not just one or the other. And if I may actually quote from Mahatma Gandhi, the guru from India, he said, if we want to change the world, we have to be what we want to change. So if we want the world to be balanced, we have to be balanced too. But what you will find also, I think, in working with or trying to help people who are ill, and we're talking about health at the moment, is that people often don't, or just don't feel able to really communicate, to really listen. And of all the skills that I think is most important in being engaged with other people, it's truly being able to listen without getting your own interests or ideas or distractions in the way, and to hear as they feel things. And I'll give you a very specific example of the compassion that represents. There's an author who talks about what she calls illness intelligence, because often people will try and, as it were, stroke people on the back emotionally, but really they're not connecting to somebody who may be very ill or feeling mentally ill or just not really connected or balanced. But what she talked about with illness intelligence, she gave a very good example. That was about a husband. A husband had terminal cancer, and he had lost his right arm already as a result. But he was a professional musician, a saxophone player. And of course, he couldn't play the saxophone anymore to be his life. So what his friends did was to show real illness intelligence. Guess what they did? They made him a left-handed saxophone so he could play, so that he had his life until he died. That's the kind of listening which I'm talking about between the person as an individual and the society in which we are relating and seeking to help to develop towards the values of greater care and understanding and of trust. Juewei?
Indeed, Stephen. I think so far we've been looking at economic crisis and we're advocating creativity to help us overcome the economic crisis. Then also with the health crisis, we advocate compassion. But as you say, they're all interrelated. And the physical and mental health crisis before us is definitely not to be underestimated. Compassion or suffering together, as compassion is defined as, allows us to open our hearts out to the cries of the many who are ill, either physically or mentally. And we are here together trying to build this culture of care. And this leads us to our final crisis, the moral crisis. Many may not be familiar with this domain, Stephen, so can you introduce us to this moral crisis, please?
Very briefly, Juewei, and I would like you to talk about this too. I think I mean, what we're confronted with on the one side is just doing what we've been doing all along, not changing things, not standing up morally to what is going on in our world, in the world around us, not exercising change. Now, this is a moral crisis internally for me. It means we ultimately are leaving the world around us in a moral dilemma or moral problems. And remember that the new norm, or the norm, in fact, which has been developing around us for daily behavior, and I suggest that in many ways we are all complicit without even thinking about it too much. It's a bit like a fish in water. It never knows what air is because it never experiences it until suddenly it's dragged onto the beach. In many ways, we can't see the alternative of the other world because we're just living within it. It's the grammar behind what we do or express in what we are doing. But remember the kind of morality, the morality which allows people to buy up supplies that are essential for people to survive during COVID and to sell them at a high price to make a personal profit while other people are dying or unable to afford them. And of all the moral crises, I think, which we face, this one, the one of self-interest and finding so many ways in which it affects us and affects those around us, is what we must pay most attention to. Now, Juewei, I'll turn this again back to you and tell us how we do this.
Right. To do that, I'd like to introduce the concept of capacity. But capacity as measured by the size of our heart. Not our physical heart, but our heart's heart. I'm not referring to our capacity in terms of how many people's work we can do or how many projects we can run simultaneously. Rather, I'm referring to how many people we can care for in our heart. So I'd like to invite you to take a few seconds to think of your answer to that question. How many people do you really care for or care about? In the meantime, I'm going to ask for permission to share screen with you again. Thank you. So let me share screen. So let me share an analogy with you. You may have seen this picture used in the context of explaining the difference between equality and equity. An adult, a teenager, and a toddler are all trying to watch a baseball game by peeping over a fence. Each has one box to stand on. That's equality. The adult actually does not need that extra box, but the toddler, even with that box, is still not tall enough. However, if the adult offers his box to the toddler, all can enjoy the game. So it's whether you look at the outcome or you look at what you give everyone. So if you look at outcome-based, it's equity. Now, I want to use this example and turn it around to look at capacity. I would suggest that capacity is that mature ability of care for others. So the adult who can care for the toddler. In Buddhism, we call that the bodhicitta. So the bodhicitta is that ability to open up what I would call the fountain of goodness or the Buddha nature that is already in us and to let it flow for the benefit of others. If we can do that, we will make a positive step forward in finding a collective solution to the moral crisis. So increasing the capacity of our heart. In Chinese, there are two characters that makes up happiness. It's called kai xin, or open the heart. If we can open the heart and put more people in there, including people we love, people who are neutral, strangers, and even people whom we're having difficulties with, then I think we are on the way towards a better world. What do you think, Stephen, in terms of how we can change our rules of the game?
Well, what we're talking about particularly is, I think, coming back to community. And this is one of the sides of the two things we're talking about today. It's being able to connect and to absorb into ourselves the people that are around us and be part of them and then being part of us, to seriously share with others. And what we're finding right now, in fact, and this is, believe it or not, even happening in economic things that are going on as well as elsewhere, but as a sociologist, which is, I guess, my main background, I can see this happening in the world around what we do. Where we can act, where we can understand meaning, where we develop our own meaning of the world is in community. It's not from television. It's not from other things. It's from our growing up and being part of the world of the other people that are around us in our community. It is at the community level that we can make change happen. And it is this level that we can leap forward. Juewei?
I really like the idea of the community level. So the moral crisis is really that big ice slab that's beneath the tip of the iceberg. We need to thaw the ice with lots of human warmth through our big hearts. And the more people in the community who can do that and make that wheel turn, the faster it will be that we can thaw the ice. So I'd like to share a practical application of what Stephen and I have done to build immunity in community. So again, please allow me to share screen if I may. Thank you so much. Okay, let me share screen. Okay, good. So we've been working on the communities of practice. So during COVID-19, we reconfigured our originally face-to-face communities of practice sessions that have around 200 registrants into weekly 30-minute Zoom sessions. So it's weekly, we can build up a practice. And the purpose of these sessions are, one, to develop a reflective practice in response to uncertainties. Two, to cultivate thoughts, words, and actions that are guided by humanistic and Buddhist values and wisdom. And three, to build much needed communities and friendships during such unusual times. The flow of this Sunday check-in series helps to develop a habit of mini reflective pauses, like what we have just experienced a little while ago. And then followed by 15-minute breakout sessions of 3 to 4 participants to share in confidence more directly incidents that occurred around a particular humanistic theme for that week. And finally, we have a feedback via chat entries. So a relaxed and informal half-hour session of open discussion follows after that for people who have time to stay longer. But generally, 30 minutes was all it takes. And because we keep running it every week, I think we've got very positive feedback. Participants have told us how precious it is to have a safe space to explore what it means to be human. And then the collective wisdom in the chat space is just amazing, some of which I'm sharing here on this slide. And this is just out of one session, which is our first session on the pause. So as a result, we are now making the past episodes available on our website, and we'll make posters out of each of our chat wisdom. You're welcome to register for this 30-minute session if you like. We are going to continue due to popular demand in the new year. And later I will post the address of our registration page onto the chat session as well. We are starting our new session this Sunday on the 10th of January. So now I'd like to turn back to Stephen to share with us what he thinks of these community sessions, as well as to close our dialogue. Stephen.
Thank you, Juewei. For me, the program, the half-hour sessions were great. It was literally like having kind of like a shot in the arm every week. And half an hour was a very good time, surprisingly enough. Longer than that, it becomes something you've got to do. Half an hour is kind of like a sudden stimulus. And like you experienced, in terms of, for example, the brief meditation we had before. In this program, we are allowed to quieten down and then to go into breakout sessions of only just 3 or 4 people. And what that allowed people to do, particularly people who are a little bit shy, was to actually participate and build an understanding and to start to trust. None of that was recorded, it was entirely private, but it allowed people then to come back with a different way of thinking and understanding. Now, there's two things about this. Number one, we're not just talking about people around Wollongong. The reach of this program goes as far as Sri Lanka, I think Europe, certainly China, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, California, other parts of America, all around Australia. And one of the interesting side products of this is that you have no idea where these people are. I mean, all you see is just somebody on a screen that could be right next to you in the house down the road. The only difference you can really tell is that they look a bit sleepy because the time zone's wrong. But it really is already a global impact of this group. But it's more than that. It's also becoming one increasingly where the people engaged in this community of practice are expanding their own interests in their own interventions in their own world to apply the same sorts of values to the people around them within their own communities. That's starting to happen now. So it is a base for development of the role of the self in relation to the development of communities beyond just the community of practice. So if I may very quickly summarize key things of what we're trying to say. Remember the title, and the bit in the middle is in. Capitalize the in, I-N. It's immunity in community. Don't just keep it as something on the side. It's fundamentally connected between you, the individual, and the community which is around you and which you are feeding off and they are feeding off you. That is where change happens. That's where meaning happens. That's where you can do things. And to summarize, the COVID crisis offers us a shock. And we needed this shock, like a bolt of lightning, perhaps, to suddenly get us to realize how far we'd gone along this trajectory of self-interest. And I haven't got time to go into it now, but if you look at where you go in economics, it's becoming increasingly self-interest oriented and absolutely connected to a very, very small elite that control things. The frame behind, or the water which is under or next to the iceberg on which we stand. The future even aligns, interestingly enough, with what's starting to happen in economic theory as well, and economic practice. And that is that creativity is becoming increasingly important, and the community and even individuals in the community are becoming important in extraordinary, creating an extraordinary value. Look at any of the major technological changes that have happened in the last 10 years, Facebook, Twitter, or whatever. They've come from individuals in a community playing in their garage. But there's so much more we can do. And I'll give you a crazy example because I only came across it a couple of days ago. You know, the little plastic, what do you call them? Little plastic bits that hold a bag of bread together. They clip onto it and they hold it together. They're tiny little things, about 2 centimeters square. Some people in Australia realize, in fact, people just threw them away, because I do. Never even thought of anything you could do with them. And they're collecting them and they're getting people to make art out of them. And in fact, if they get 200,000 of these little clips all together and they're getting them, they're then using that to actually purchase and send a wheelchair to somebody who needs it in Africa. In other words, there's opportunity around us if only we look. Creativity is therefore at the core. We have to go much further in finding new solutions. The transformation ultimately, however, comes from our humanity, our human and our social essence. This is the power, I believe, of a festival such as the Homecoming Festival that you have now. It's a power of you being together, even though you're doing it virtually. It's a power that comes out of music and creativity. It's a power that is there because it's a power of exploring our humanity. And I'll finish with something which is on your promotional poster. And it's something which I wrote quite recently and so on in the book, The Kyoto Manifesto for Creative Economics. And I'll just quote myself in this one. It's easier than any other way. Our power to heal our currently fractured society and build harmony lies in the depth of our humanity, our spirituality. What is sacred or of imperishable supreme value is what we can be as a human race. What we can be. Empowered, fulfilled individuals living in harmony, deeply sharing and caring for each other across our separate culture and life worlds, where mindfulness, mutual human benefit and life worlds, they connect. The mindfulness, mutual human benefit and mutual trust are the norms in our economic relations, rather than separative self-interest and the contracted, immediate economic deal. This particularly at community level is developing what Juewei and I like to call a culture of care. And I believe this is something which you are on a path, perhaps, in this kind of program you're involved in now. And perhaps you're moving on this path as well. Thank you so much for listening to Juewei and I. It's our privilege to have the chance to share some thoughts with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Juewei and Stephen. That was very insightful. I'm always learning new things every day from both of you. And I'm sure our audience hopefully have gained and also experienced the very many important subjects that has been raised, but also solutions that has been presented to help us to heal in this very concerning period of our lifetime. And I must say, Juewei, there was a very relaxing experience, the very short meditation, because I was waking up today was, with lack of sleep, and even though I had some breakfast, but that didn't really help much. And with all the things that are going on, not just preparing the festival, but just our surroundings, environment, due to this pandemic has been very anxious. Even within the very close circles of our community, the family, the neighbors, and even our friends. So that experience of, just take a moment, just, feel our body and kind of free our minds from the surrounding, that helps. So I think, in the next, hopefully, opportunity, we can have a more longer experience in that. And I think Juewei has also informed us about the community of practice session. And we are very happy to promote that in our social media and our website, so that everybody that have joined the homecoming journey with us could also join the session, the community of practice sessions that you organize. We have in the chat box, I can see TS has posted from Bogs. There's a question that I'm going to start to address. So the first one, Box asked, I listened to a webinar that provided by scientists. They said that deforestation is one of the pandemic factors. But current economic practice forces us to consume more, and we sacrifice more lands. Question is, how do we deal with such condition? Should we change our habit extremely? So that's the question, and I believe, I think part of this, I believe that have already been slightly addressed, but not in the specific context of deforestation. So maybe I could refer this directly to Stephen first, and then maybe Juewei can respond. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bubu, and thank you for that question. There was always responsibility of us personally. I have no question about that. We cannot just simply say everybody else is at fault and not us. And I think there's a number of things we can do. I mean, what we've really got to do, more than anything else, is to have some influence over the people who make the decisions that affect that deforestation. That means paying attention to your political process and trying to get politicians involved and caring about it. It also might mean maybe getting people together in your own community and doing something that might actually be a practical thing to do. Firstly, it demonstrates the possibility. Secondly, it allows you to maybe make things change. I mean, the sort of influence that you see from, the teenage girl in Europe at the moment, just had her 18th birthday. I forgot her name. Anyway, you know who I mean. She just simply started to stand up and say, this really matters. And she started to change the world as a result of standing up and doing something herself, which I think is really also very important. So it's a range of things which we can do. Firstly, to ourselves, take our own action and be conscious of what we do, and perhaps pay attention to not doing things that require products that are going to be a product of requiring deforestation. And that's partly possible. I think it's secondly something where we actually take action ourselves and we stand up and we maybe get involved with other people so that we can build something even at small levels, small roots, green roots that may perhaps be able to flower later on. And I think we pay attention to the political process in which we are able to perhaps start to influence people at a higher level in terms of decisions that are made and attitudes about the way we should look at our environment. Juewei, do you have something you'd like to add to that?
Yes, I do. I think that whoever has asked this question has already thought of some answers because he or she has mentioned what is it that we can do personally. I think if there's a deforestation movement going on, one of the things we could do is to plant trees. We can plant more trees in our backyards where we can, or we join in programs that plant trees. For example, here at Nan Tien Temple, we're committed to plant 100 trees a year. So to keep the trees going. And we can protect the environment in many other ways too. For example, we can give ourselves an increasingly plant-based diet. We could take shorter showers. We could use handkerchiefs instead of tissue papers. I think we can consider ourselves as, let's say, a little tiny cogwheel. I can't turn that big cogwheel out there. But if there are several of us, all these little cogwheels turning in the right direction towards protecting the environment, towards using less plastic, towards recycling, towards upcycling, then this small little cogwheel or the multitude of small little cogwheels can turn the medium cogwheels, the institutions. And many of these medium cogwheels can then turn the big cogwheel, the big environmental pollutants. So I believe it's possible, one step at a time. It's better that we do a little bit. And if we keep doing, I believe we'll make it. One starfish at a time, right?
Sorry, just one thing. The woman I was trying to think of, the young woman I was trying to think of is Greta Thunberg. Who's been very, very active in terms of developing a general consciousness about environmental action. There's also interesting movements that are happening even in business now. I mean, the world is so different on these issues compared to when I was probably the age of many of the people who are tuned in now. And that was in the 1960s. No one even knew about the fact this environment might be an issue somewhere. It wasn't even thought of as an issue. Just people just did it. Didn't matter. It took time, and it started in the early 70s and built over a period of time. And people started to develop a consciousness and research started to show the problems which were there. So in that sense, it's a relatively new thing. But business is now paying attention. There's a movement, particularly in Europe, which one of my colleagues, or one of our colleagues in the book we're writing is involved in Asia, called the circular economy movement. And it very specifically is business, their task is to recycle everything. Nothing is left when they produce a product. Nothing is left. All is turned into something which matters or is useful. But I couldn't agree more than with Juewei. Little things, perhaps they will start little, and I did use this idea of Greta Thunberg as an example. They can grow into enormous things. Little seeds can grow and they can flower, and particularly planting trees, as Juewei is doing, starting something happening with the people around you. It's very easy. It is not too hard to do. And thinking particularly of a particular edge, something different that people will pay attention to. I think you can always do something.
And I think it's also important to add mindfulness to the practice. I've put into the chat the mindful check-in app that we developed at the Nan Tien Institute, because you can choose between a 1 minute to a 60-minute meditation length. So Boo, when you just need that 1 minute and that's all the time you've got that opportunity. But if, let's say, you have a little bit more time, you can go up to 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and give ourselves that space. Why that's important is that sometimes we get too output oriented. We're just very busy. We want to see that change happen. However, change takes time. A lot of times, I think activists get extremely burnt out in the process. And what the mindfulness practice does is that it helps us to ground ourselves back again and to help us recognize it's the direction that's important. We're moving in that direction. We may not have all the conditions to control the outcome in the end. But the fact that we're moving in that direction, we then leave all the other conditions to take care of the rest. So it's important that we keep coming back to ourselves as well to ensure that we just keep the cogwheel turning in that positive direction. More people will join us and we give ourselves that time. We have to be patient.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Boga, I hope that's have fulfilled your questions. Thank you. There is a question from Bintang Perkasa, which Stephen's already familiar with, and obviously, yes, I have to inform you also that this dialogue is intended for the participants originally of the homecoming, because it is important in this the new normal, say the virtual world we're living today because of COVID, that we still be able to maintain our human connections. And also it's very important to have everybody that contributed to this homecoming, to this dialogue today, is participating in it. So there's a question from Bintang, who's a graphic designer at Sacred Bridge. He said that, I'm not good at socializing. Does it mean I'm lacking of caring for other? Or is it just simply my personality? He said, sorry if it sounds a stupid question for everyone, but it is something I'm struggle with, he said. So.
That is not a stupid question. I'll let Juewei go first, and then I want to.
All right, I want to share with Bintang that I'm an introvert. If I have an opportunity, I don't want to be in front of a Zoom camera and I don't want to be with people. I prefer to be buried in books and leave the world outside of me. So in a sense, I'm very grateful to COVID. I was sharing with Stephen, COVID is making my Pure Land come true. I can be isolated from everyone else. I don't have to travel anywhere and I can stay home. But I realized something very early on in my career is that human beings are social animals. In a way, we operate best in communities and we will need communities. So if we don't hold our hand out, nobody will catch our hand. They can't, they have nothing to grab onto. So what I have learned is that I have to be brave enough to open myself up to the world. And even if I may be broken, even if I'm not perfect, it's okay. So with this, may I have permission to share my screen? I prepared this particular story, and I think this may be one that I share with you very quickly. I thought it's appropriate for this because it's about a violinist that some of you may be familiar with. Now, Itchak Perman is, as some of you may know, he suffers from polio. But in I believe it's 1995, something really happened in New York City when he was performing. And one of the strings on his violin suddenly snapped during his performance. But it didn't stop Perlman. He just paused for a little bit and he told the conductor, carry on. And on three strings on his violin, he made the violin sound amazing. It sounded that you would not have heard from any other four-string regular violins. And at the end of the concert, to a standing ovation, he just said something very simple. He said, it is the artist's task to find out how much music you can still make with what you have left. I think many of us are introverts, so we don't want to deal with a lot of other people. We want not to socialize because we may feel that we are that three-stringed violin. Well, it's okay. It's okay to be a three-stringed violin. It's okay to be a half moon because we are just as beautiful. A crescent moon is just as beautiful as a full moon. And we want to shine towards others. So if we can just keep that thought of living life, of also lighting up other people's lives, I think that will help us to overcome the hurdle of not wanting to socialize with others and to know that we are normal. I hope that helps. Over to you, Stephen.
Well, I'll add a personal thing. Maybe this sounds strange these days, but I genuinely used to be really shy. And I also felt, when I was old, I didn't do too bad at stuff. I just never felt all that confident other people around me. Obviously, absolutely terrific and brilliant and all these sorts of things. And slowly I learned a couple of things. One is you got to forgive yourself. I mean, if you're all the time thinking, oh God, I really can't do that, I'm terrible, it's awful. And you got to take the courage to simply take a step out a bit. You have to. More importantly, the lesson I learned, and it's a lesson about listening. Okay, and I'll tell you very precisely what it is. It affected me particularly when I first arrived in Indonesia. Okay? I'll tell you what it was. I'd just been appointed an ambassador of the United Nations. Okay, sounds big, but it's scary, really scary. And I had to constantly in receptions and so on. And Indonesia has, I think, 102 embassies, if I recollect, which means you've got at least 3 a week receptions where you've got to talk to people. And I found that this was a beautiful way, in fact, of starting to develop the relations with countries and people if you were able to develop a good relationship with the people there. You didn't do deals or anything like that, but you were able to talk to them and talk to them later. What I found was most important, and at the first really worried me, because there'd be a group of, say, 6 ambassadors who were looking terribly well-dressed, talking to each other with a certain level of power. And I'd be this little stranger coming in from outside, wondering, what did I get into this group, And what I found is simply the fact you just do it. And then, though, the key thing is not to present yourself, is to ask really good questions about them. Let them talk. The people who will really, really like you are people to whom you probably say nothing about you, but they say everything about them to you. They feel because you brought them out. So try then say, if you can do this, I mean, firstly, you've got a bit of a shell on yourself to say, I'm okay, I can do this, because you're no worse than anybody else. But then when you're talking to people, when you're dealing with people, when you're learning people about them in the first case, be very, very conscious to listen, not to present how good you are or what you do. Let them ask about that. But find out about them. And then, if you possibly can, try and chase a little bit of their interest and say, well, you play golf a lot. What's good about golf? Something really interesting that allows you to get great experience out of hitting a golf ball, or whatever it might be. The point is, you try to grow them, and they will love you for that. Great relationship.
That's so true, and can probably practice in our communities of practice breakout groups. 4 persons.
Yes, you could come along to
Yes, very important. Yeah.
11 o'clock Australia time. That means it's 7 o'clock your time. You'll have to get up early.
So go to bed early.
Oh, thank you both. As we already predicted that the talk is going to go over, but I hope you all don't mind that we stay for slightly longer than we expected. And I would just briefly reading out some of the comments from our audience. We have Madje Purino. Apologize if I mention spelling the name, pronounce the names wrong. Madje said, a very powerful and helpful message, Venerable Juewei, timely for the new year. And also we have a greetings from Zishan. Hello, Zishan. Zishan is a Buddhist nun from Nan Tien Temple. And from Cecile Manikan, thank you for the powerful message of hope, Venerable Juewei and Stephen. I like the comparative definition of equality and equity. Equity now, as it relates to compassion and capacity to care even more with some creative enabling acts, a very clear concept. That's from Cecile. And also from one of our dear friends also here with us, Monica Hapsari, which I would like both of you to meet. Also, Monica has also been helping us to create this homecoming journey so far. Thank you so much, Mr. Stephen and Venerable Juewei. So awesome. Bu Dolorosa Sinaga said hi. Dolorosa is a sculptress who Stephen might have met in the past program of Sacred Bridge. She said she couldn't come because she's teaching an online class. And also last one from Tatum, Maya. Welcome, Tatum, and thank you, Stephen and Juewei, for sharing the great experiences and insights. Yes. Okay, that's all for today. And on behalf of the whole team of homecoming event, once again, thank you to Stephen and then Juewei for being with us on the very last minute preparation. And also thank you on giving us some inspiration, because as you know, Juewei posted what Stephen also have re-emphasized, that this homecoming, this Sacred Rhythm Reborn Unison homecoming is very highly inspired by the theme of polyphonic co-creation. As Juewei mentioned earlier on the term of harmonious coexistence. And in this Sacred Rhythm through music, we're experimenting, I would say, and also trying out new ways of rebuilding the very basic value of human trust through the concept of polyphonic co-creation, which is Stephen, Stomu Yamashita in particular, have initiated this to bring a diverse themes whether it be subjective, objective, into creating this overall harmony through music. And I have to say, so far we have received such amazing response from people from everywhere, through emails, through WhatsApp, and from all the musicians that have performed in our YouTube channel. It seems only at this period of time that we feel the very connection, even though it is a virtual tool that we are using to communicate. But still, I think from the responses so far, that there's something which sometimes I couldn't explain, that this very objective that we're trying to achieve, which is building trust, that there's this new level of compassion and caring within this homecoming event. So I think that's something I should share. And obviously the journey is not finished yet. We still have a half a month to go until the final event. And the dialogue also continues. And please follow our social media on SRRU. We can share through the chat box that Tias can share, and also through the emails that you already have registered with, and to our website. There will be more performances and also more dialogue, which hopefully Stomu Yamashita-san and Stephen will be joining us again on a different topic. And thank you very much again. Please stay safe and stay healthy. Keep in touch with us at this homecoming journey. So anything you want to comment later on, email us and we will deliver the message to everyone that's involved. So, again, thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And see you very soon.